For many bass fishermen, the shoreline gets 100% of their angling attention, while the main body of the lake, the part that seems to stretch too far to effectively fish, is left almost untouched. It seems the fear of the unknown, a fear inherent to all of us, keeps most anglers bank-bound. With structure fishing, it's often this fear of the unknown that keeps anglers from possibly loading their live wells full of bass.
All right.
In this video, 2000 Bassmasters Classic champion Woo Daves will explain how he effectively targets offshore structure spots to score big when large purses are on the line. If it's about structure, it's here. Map study, seasonal patterns, best baits to fish, and much more. Never before has a video gone this deep into the subject of structure, and never before has a professional angler made it so easy to understand. Get out a pen and paper and take lots of notes. Structure fishing with Woo Daves will prove to be an education that will provide success and enjoyment for years to come.
Hi, I want to thank you for buying this video, and today we're going to try and introduce you to structure fishing. We're down on Lake Eufaula in Alabama, which I consider to be one of the finest structure lakes in the country. It's got some kind of structure that'll cover about anything in any lake. And we're here with Jackie Thompson today, and he's been on the lake for 30 years, and he knows about every rock in there. And we're going to go over the map, and Jack's going to show me some places to try today.
Woo, I really appreciate you having the confidence in me to ask me to help you today, and I'll try to do the very best I can and help you get this structure fishing video complete.
Well, I sure do appreciate it, and you're the best down here. And as far as I know, we can go over the map, Jackie, and I'll be ready to get out there on the lake and see if I can catch me a fish.
All right.
Get out of the brush. Got him out of that one piece. A lot of times you can hold your rod way up like this and reel them, and that'll make them want to come up to the top and get out of that brush pile when you know there's a lot of brush in the area. I'm having trouble with this one. There he is. This is a nice fish, I believe. Yeah, real nice. Got him out of the brush. Look at here, son. Whew. That's what I mean. Come on here. Ooh, yes. Let me show you what I'm looking for when I look at a map. There's a lot of different key places, and it might look confusing, but it's really not confusing at all. I'm going to start out at kind of the top of the map and work down and point out the different structures that are places that I would look for on this map right off the bat. Starting up here at the top, the very first place I'd look at if I put in there would be these two creek channels coming together that form a point. And that's a perfect migration route and a perfect feeding route, and just everything's perfect. Our current will be hitting, and work on down that to the few bends in the creek. Then you come to a bridge. There's probably an underwater bridge there if you looked around. Coming right under that bridge, here's a really sharp point out of underwater. Very sharp bend, almost a 90 degree. I mean, you got to almost turn the boat all the way around and head back in the other direction. So that's a key spot. You've got an inside point and an outside point. As you work out that creek, just a little ways, a couple little bends that might hold a fish, but you've got a little feeder creek coming in. And to me, those are some of the key underwater spots, those little creeks coming in. That's what you call a sweet spot, so to speak. Working on out a few more ledges, then boom, you drop off into the major river. We're gonna make a right, come down the river, you're gonna come in close to the bank, work back out, then coming down a few more ledges, then here it comes in close to the bank again for a pretty good stretch. And what I really like about this is you've got little finger points coming off in this area. That means the fish can come up and feed, but he can dump right back into deep water for security. It comes right on down, bends around. We got riprap with good water right next to it. Matter of fact, a tournament was won right there a few years ago. As you come under that bridge and look back in here, you can see you've got a road bed going across. And I'll show you a couple more of those as we go down the lake. But coming down on under the bridges in the main river, here's another nice feeder creek coming out that got a lot of bends in it, plenty of places for the fish to hold, drops right off in the channel again. Then here you got a nice river ledge humps. And then as you come on down here, we've got a pond dam right here. We've got a blown out bridge right here, river bridge and everything. Bunch of S-curves in this creek. I mean, you could just fish this for days and days, just this one little channel.
What comes to my mind right away, Woo, is this old farm pond here. It sits right in the mouth of this creek, and consequently, as these fish come in, they hang up here for a while as they move on up this creek. Plus, you have a spawning flat close by.
Right.
So this would be an ideal place to catch these fish as they're migrating out of this creek, out into this deeper structure.
As you come on down the lake, right in this area, look, we've got ditches running back up through this flat. And they would be pretty easy to find, and you could cover them pretty quick with a trolling motor. Water rushing right down them and everything, it ought to be prime. Working on down, a couple more bends, and getting down here around this creek, you've got several nice things in this creek. You've got a couple road beds. You can look at Highway 76. That's one thing you want to do when you're structure fishing, is learn to read the lay of the land. In other words, if there was a nice road going down and comes to the end of this point, well, guess what? They didn't stop building the road there. It kept on going across the lake somewhere. And a lot of times those roads will have crisscross junctions in them, channels crossing them out there. So look on your map and study those, because road beds is probably one of the prime key fishing spots in any lake in the country. Day in and day out, it gets fished a lot, but it'll produce a lot of fish. Coming on down, you've got a couple old foundations and stuff. And then we get down here near the dam, and it's always been one of my prime places to fish at the dam, because that's the first place the current moves. And a lot of times they're opening locks and stuff and letting boats through, give you a little extra current, even if they're not generating that day. And fish just seem to love the riprap and everything. And this dam right here is really perfect because it's got a great spawning flat on one side of the lake.
I'd like to point out to you, Woo, if you notice this little indication here that you got a little deeper water right in this area right here. Well, I know
see, a lot of people would look at a map and never see that.
Never paying attention
right there,
to it.
just wouldn't be paying attention.
But that's a big key, because that area right in there is going to hold you better fish.
That's a good fish. Come on, come on. Man. Yes, 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 yes. You know, another thing you want to think about in structure fishing is your seasonal patterns. You want to be in the proper area at the proper time. Pre-spawn, probably back right before they're getting ready to move into the flats and stuff, and the ditches and the points right closest to the spawning area. So you're going to be back in your creeks and flats and stuff. Post-spawn, when the fish first come off the beds, they're going to leave and go to the first deep water. Deep water doesn't have to mean 30 foot, it can mean 6 foot. You know, a ditch or anything. This is one of the prime times to fish those community holes around those bridges and stuff, because every fish that's in that flat spawning has got to come through that bridge at some time or another. Once they move out there, you're going to start looking for your points, your little humps, your key spots in mid-creek back. After a week or two, then you're going to start working toward the main creek. Once you get out into the main creek, then the next thing you look for is your river ledges. And we're at a time right now in this lake where we've got fish at every one of those spots. They're in a transition mode and there's fish moving everywhere, but the majority of them are back into creeks. But we do have a few fish out on the ledges. But if we come back in 3 weeks from now, we'd probably skip the last half of the creek. And don't get me wrong, creeks will hold fish all year, but we're talking about the major places to look for them at the time of year. And so in the summertime, spend your time out on your mouth of the creeks and your river ledges, and then in the fall, look for the fish to come right back and go back into creek somewhat, and you'll have fish on main and creek ledges then.
You know, Woo, one thing to always be aware of and be familiar with is looking at your map and relating north, south, east, and west on it. The wind causes currents for one thing, And it's particularly important during the year when the spawn is taking place. Fish don't want the north wind blowing on where they're going to bed, so they're going to get behind something, bank or riprap or whatever the structure might be, to make their nest so this north wind doesn't blow on their nest.
I know when I go fishing, one of the first things I do, I'm listening to the radio or checking the weather channel, and if it says the wind's blowing such and such a way, I make sure I find me a ramp to put in where I don't have to take that beating. You know, I see some of these young guys, they'll put in and just take off down the lake 30 miles and 4-foot waves and come in with no windshield on their boat or lost the troma or something. And you know, me, I'd much rather ride in that nice Chevrolet truck with the air conditioning on and take my time and get down to my fishing hole and launch and fish. So that can help a lot. Plus also it tells you where all your, you know, north coves are that are gonna warm up the first. You can eliminate a lot of stuff on this map for your seasonal fishing just by looking at it. And that's what I'm trying to get across to you. You know, think about that seasonal pattern and take your map and say, yeah, look here, this is what I wanna fish. Right here, circle it. And this is the next spot I want to look at, and this spot I want to look at, whatever it is, and have a pattern together and go to that area, take your time, fish it, study it, and then go to your next spot, A, B, C, D, E, and study them as you go along. When you come back to that area again, if you caught fish there, then spend more time in it, branching out, watching your depth finder, looking for underwater spots and sweet spots within the structure. And I think you'll find yourself catching a lot more fish. You know, this is one of the prime perfect spots to catch bass. Here we're on a big spawning flat, got 4 or 5 foot of water. We're out here 200 yards offshore. Bass can spawn all down through here. As soon as they come off the beds, where are they gonna pull to? They're gonna pull to the first deepest water. And we've got a nice ditch that runs right down through the middle of this flat. So you can see how it fell off from 5 to 12 to 13. A little bit of brush right there in the bottom. I'm gonna show you something about that brush in just a second. And coming right on along here, probably about 20 yards, and it starts right back up. Comes right back up kind of quick. We're back up in 10 foot again. It's gonna drop to 8 here in just a second. But if you look straight ahead up here on the bank and see that house sitting up there, and you see those steps running straight down. Well, what happened this winter, evidently, while everybody was at home watching the football game, somebody brought some brush out here and dumped it in the creek. And as soon as I saw it on my depth finder and I have to look up, it was a perfect lineup with those steps. So I know that's what they use to line up to put their brush in. So that's a very easy one to find from now on. All I gotta do is come in, get on the other side of the ditch, line up with the steps, run straight toward them, and I'll come right over my brush. Or I can get a little bit above the steps, and as soon as I cross the ditch, just fish down parallel with the ditch and I'll be able to hit the brush. So that's a little trick. Whenever you see something special on your depth finder, be it a hump, rock pile, stump, or anything, immediately look up and get you a mark so that you'll be able to come back to it, or hit your GPS if you've got your GPS. You know, when we came across that ditch, I crisscrossed it 3 or 4 times, and each time we were in 5 to 7 foot of water on the lips, dropping into 12 to 15. Well, what I'm looking at there is I want a lure that's going to run in about that depth range. In other words, I don't want to take a great big deep diving lure and fish there. I'm going to go down to my mid-range lures. Say for instance like the XPS crankbait. I know this bait will run 8 to 10 foot deep. The Model A by Bomber, Fat-Free Shad. This is a little flats bait Jerry Lower makes. All these baits are running the 7 to 11 foot range, which would cover that area just perfect. Another thing that I want to do, I've got my big 1.5 ounce spinnerbait tied on for a spot later on, but I got an ounce one out. Now, if I was going to fish my spinnerbait here, I'd use a 3/4 to 1 ounce, because that's all I need to work that 7 foot range to start with. But the thing about this heavy spinnerbait is I can work it along that same range a lot faster. So I'm offering my bass 2 different speeds of lures. So you might want to try both of them if you're not getting a bite, but we'll talk about that more later on. Your normal Carolina rig lures, Carolina rig's going to be good on all the structures we talk about today. Your Zoom lizards, your Zoom centipedes, your Zoom brush hogs, flukes, all your Zoom lures. And one other key lure that I like is a topwater lure on these shallow structures. Don't be afraid to pull right up when you first get there and throw that something like a spook or a pop arse or extreme topwater lure over that hump and work it a little bit to see if some of those fish, maybe when you first pulled up there, they got aggressive for a second and they'll come up and bust that top water. But that'll be your key staples and when we're fishing this depth of water. Now when we move out into deeper water later on, I'll get other lures out and show you those to fish that type of water. You know, basically what we're doing here, we found this ditch. It's about 30 yards wide and it's about 8 foot on one side and about 5 foot, 6 foot on the other. So what I'm doing, I'm just basically going right down the middle of the ditch, keeping the boat in like 14, 16 foot of water. And either way I throw, I know I'm gonna be coming over a lip. And I'm just trying a variety of different baits, slow rolling the 1 ounce spinner bait right now. Because of the shallowness of the water, when it gets a little bit deeper, I'd go on up to a heavier lure. Throwing a Carolina rig a little bit, feeling the bottom, looking for stumps and rocks and brush piles and any kind of structure like that, and even throwing the medium running crankbait a lot. And just covering water up and down this ditch, trying to find where the fish are holding and find a sweet spot along here. Just throw that bait out, let it go down until it hits bottom, slow roll it along. Keep eye on your depth finder if you start coming up shallow. In other words, if I start, there he is. Now that was pretty good now. Second cast of the morning. You boys want to know something. That's what I'm talking about. There's your 1 ounce spinner bait, throw it up on the ledge in 4 foot, and as soon as it ticked off the edge of that ledge, bam, he knocked the crap out of it. So the first thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna turn him loose, but if we was in a tournament, I'm gonna put a marker buoy out right here on this spot. I'm gonna look up on the bank, see where I was at, make sure I know where I'm at. And I think that turned out pretty good. Here's another key spot. We've got a road bed that comes out here and it's got an old bridge on it that's actually still got the steel railings and everything. And you find a lot of these on your lake, on most all your lakes. We should be, see we're coming up right now, we come right on up to 13, 14. I'm gonna put a marker buoy out, 9, right back into 23. So we got a perfect deal coming out there, and it's an old bridge. It's still got the rails and everything on it. Good fish, good fish. Good fish. Come to daddy. The old ledge buster scored again. Come to daddy. This is a good fish, man. Good fish. Come to daddy. That's what it's all about. You can see that fish. She's probably just spawned out. She's got a little rough plot on her tail, but still a nice 4.5 pound bass, close to 5 pounds. Ledge buster spinnerbait down there about 12 or 13 foot off the edge of that. As soon as I hit that bridge pile and I had a tap and I missed it, and when I pulled it over and I let it flutter down, bam, it like took the rod away from me. You know, that's what structure fishing's all about. It doesn't take long to get well with fish this size. You got guys out there catching a 2-pounder here and a 2-pounder there, and you pull up and catch 2 of these, you pretty much got him beat. Gonna give her a little kiss and we're gonna let her go back, and hopefully somebody else will get the charge out of catching her like I did. All right, Big Daddy, go on back. You know, when I got up here to make my first cast, I was sitting up on top of the road, and I looked down, it was like 9 foot. Now I'm in 35 foot, and I hadn't even hit the trolling motor, and I'm still a half a cast away from the top of that bridge. So actually I'm fishing 9 or 10 foot of water, but it's surrounded by 30, 35 foot of water on each side. So this is a prime spot, especially for the fish coming out of the spawning flats in the back of the creek to stop on. And again, with that depth of water and everything, you could catch a fish here most any time of year. I could imagine coming back in the fall after it cools down pretty good and getting right on the corners of this bridge with jigging spoons, something like a Hopkins or a Mano lure or a Extreme XPS lure, you know, like anything in the 3/4 to 1 ounce range, and just jigging all around the edge of this and everything. Probably this would be a prime spot for that. But again, there's just so many, on all these structures, really there's just so many different techniques of lures and stuff that you can use, and you need not, just don't get settled in on one old crankbait and throw it all day and say, oh, they're not biting crankbaits. Try a little bit of everything. Give it all a shot. Work up shallow on the road, back out to the bridge, covering all along the edge of it. You know, one thing you want to learn to do when you're fishing structures, keep an eye on that depth finder and trying to stay out in your channel. If you notice it start getting shallow and coming up, just back off and go out to your left a little bit. A lot of times when you're what I call structure fishing, even if I'm going down the bank throwing a crankbait or something, and people wonder why they catch 2 or 3 fish in one area and then go a long ways and maybe catch 2 or 3 more, and they're not paying attention to their depth finder, what they're doing, they're probably out, say, in 10 foot of water when they catch those fish and throwing their bait up into 5. And as they go down the bank, maybe they come up on a long, shallow flat or something, and now they're in like 5 foot of water fish, and they don't ever know it, and then they drop off the other end and maybe catch 2 or 3 other fish. Well, if they'd be paying attention to their depth finder where they caught these fish, when you started coming up on that shallow water, you maybe would turn to the left and start working out, and then you may be another 50 yards out off the bank, but you would have the bait in the same depth of water where you were fishing. And that's one thing you want to do. You want to try and, when you're structure fishing, stay in the same depth when you start catching fish. You know, this is a perfect scenario for just about every lake in the country right here. It's another structure. And this is a pretty obvious one, but a lot of people will still overlook this stuff. This is where the road comes down the water. You can see how it comes right through the trees, comes into the water, and as you come up on top of it with your depth finder, you'll be able to see it with no problem. And every bridge that you see going across the lake, more than likely, has got a road crossing the lake. And somewhere where that road crosses out there, there's going to be a creek that's probably going to have a blown out bridge or something. But anywhere along this road can be great fishing. Early in March, you can come out and fish the ditches. And there'll be a little ditch on each side with a crankbait or a big spinner bait. Work in a little bit later right after the spawn, and the fish will pull right to this road bed out of these flats and stuff and work right on out to the end of the road where the bridge is blown out to get into the channel. So the fish could be situated anywhere along here. Right now, I think it'd be some fish maybe up shallow and some out deep too, because it's a little bit early in May while we're fishing it. There he is. There he is, buddy. Watch for the fish. Come on to daddy. Not a monster, but a meanie. But you know, that's what I'm trying to tell you. We just came up here, fished down the road bed. I want to show you up close how the road comes out in the water. And as I'm casting on down here with the Carolina rig and covering things, I hit that little rock pile right there, and this fish bit it, and I felt like I was going to get a bite there. I just had confidence. You know, the thing about a road bed, you got to realize, just look when you're driving down the road at the ditches and little culverts and deeper spots and shallower spots and everything, and you got to realize that's probably right here too. You know, each one of these roads is the same, and you just start and fish it right on out, and somewhere along you're going to find a little sharper drops, a little deeper ditches, rock piles or something that's going to hold fish here. I want to get lined right back up where I can throw right back in that same spot. Because usually when you hit a spot like this, the fish will be schooled up, especially after they come off, about 3 weeks after they come off the beds. You know, riprap is another key structure on just about every lake in the United States, and sometimes it can be a little confusing to fishermen, especially new fishermen. I'm going to tell you a few things to look for on riprap that might help you to catch fish. And one thing is, around the corners of the bridges, you've always got current. If there's any water current movement at all, that's a good key spot for the fish to gang up. And that's pretty obvious any point. But if you'll look down, say you're looking down the riprap, and you see a point sticking out, instead of just, in other words, if it's a long straight row of riprap, but you see one point sticking out, that's probably going to be one of the key spots to fish. The second place would be to look at your map and see where your creek channel or river channel comes closest to the riprap, and sometimes it even touches it. And in other words, you could have a mile of riprap, but you could have a creek channel coming in for a couple hundred yards. Or you could have a shallow little flat along, in other words, a different break. In other words, it might be 15 foot for 200 yards and come up to 10 foot and go for like 50 yards and back down, so the edges of that. In other words, any breaking structure that meets that rocks along there is going to be a key place to fish. Another thing to look at is on your riprap where they build with those big square, with the big rocks, when they pile them up in there and everything, some of those rocks roll down and kind of rolled out by themselves. And as you go along, keep an eye on your depth finder, maybe working a Carolina rig outside the rocks, you'll hit some of those rocks sometimes. Another thing you'll find about riprap is, especially on the upper ends of the lake, a lot of logs blow in. A lot of trash blows in on the riprap because they're sticking out in the water a lot of times, and they'll catch this stuff. You know, and that can offer some fantastic fishing because those bass are moving down those rocks, and here they find them a nice piece of wood to hide around to ambush something. And I find a jig, spinnerbait, both work really good in that situation, or a worm later on in the year. Yeah, this is another great spot on every lake in the country, the corner of the riprap. Offers a perfect migration route in and out. It narrows down the channel. The fish has got to come through here when he's going or coming. And what I try and do, one thing I try and do is find where the rocks meet the ground. Try and establish where that point is, where the riprap, in other words, comes down and hits whatever structure is going out and cast right along in that area. A lot of fish like to use this riprap. It offers, again, heat in the cold weather, and a lot of bait fish and crawfish and stuff hanging around it all year. It keeps a good food supply for the fish. And there's tons of tournaments won off of riprap like this and bridges, and it's just a place you don't ever want to overlook. And one thing I've found on fishing a tournament, a lot of times when conditions are really, really tough and you know there's not going to be much caught, a lot of those are the tournaments that are won off of riprap where the people do good. So think about that if you're on your home lake and you got a really cold weather or bad conditions or something. A lot of times you can get that one or two fish around that riprap when you can't catch them anywhere else. You know, here's a perfect, another little corner of riprap. You've got the river channel coming right out of this bridge and swinging right around this corner, a perfect place for shad and stuff to stack up. Great place to throw a worm with I like to use a real light weight around these rocks so I don't stay hung up. I got a 1/16 ounce on here, and there's a fish right there. That didn't take long. Good one too. There's a nice 2-pound fish. You know, he threw my little Zoom, had a Zoom finesse worm on here, 6-inch finesse worm. I got a light wire Mustad Ultra Point 2/0 hook. But notice here I've got a little bitty lightweight. That's a 1/16 of an ounce. And the reason I like that little lightweight around these rocks because it won't hang up near as bad. It'll let the worm and everything will work down through the rocks and you'll stay hung up. You know, I fished with guys using 1/4 ounce and stuff like that, and they're just constantly breaking off every time. And you can swim it with that little sinker and almost keep it virtually from hanging up. So that's a neat trick for you when you're fishing these rocks. Now here's another spot. This is just a shallow hump that's marked with 2 signs. You know it's shallow. You know what you got here is a shallow bar because of the 2 signs. That boat's over in deep water fishing. And I'm sitting in 31 foot of water right here. See a little shad breaking? That's another real good sign. When you see a shad breaking on top of a ledge or something like that, that's a good sign that there's fish here. But I'm sitting in 32 foot of water, and that sign right there is in probably 3 foot of water. And I could almost flip a marble over there and hit it in the air. So this is a good place for fish to pull right up and drop right back in that deep water like I told you earlier when we were going over the map. This is a hump like that. Plus you've got an end going out that way, and you've got an end going out that way, and it's easy to figure that out because of the signs. And it only takes a couple minutes if you know the fish are biting a Carolina rig or you know they're biting a spinnerbait or something to pull up out there, get on your deck, just coming on your boat to you in, let's say 13, 14 foot of water, stop, throw straight in toward that sign, then go around and do the same thing on the other end, and you can fish this spot in just a few minutes. So don't ever pass up something like this. I noticed one earlier riding down the lake, and I almost stopped and fished it. And I'm just going to run the Carolina rig around this a couple times and see if I can get something. What I'm doing right here now, I'm sitting in 26 foot of water, and I can almost flip cast over to where my lure hit in 4 foot of water. It's probably just a nice little lob cast. And as I work the boat around, you know, I'm going already, I mean, just in that little spell right there, I've gone from 26 to 32 foot, and I'm still an easy cast to the sign. Yet when I cast over the sign, my bait hits, and it only takes 3 seconds to hit bottom. So I'm working right down a nice ledge with this Carolina rig, and as I work around this way and get lined up with the hump, it's going to come back up shallow again. So I'm going to keep an eye on this so I don't get right up on top where the fish should be, and just, you know, work right around the edge of it. If you notice here, I'm using a little Zoom brush hog. I've dipped the tail in Spike It Dye chartreuse. And another neat thing I've got on here that I really like, a Lindy's No Snag rattling weight on here. I'm using 1/2 ounce right now because I'm fishing shallow and we don't have much wind. I've got the Northland's little slide deal that holds my weight. I've got the Carolina Keeper on here that I can adjust up and down the line to make my leader whatever length I want to. Cover a lot of water with the Carolina rig pretty quick. And what I'm going to do when I get around on this end, I say I'm already up into 20 foot from 33 foot just by turning the bow of the boat. And I'm coming right on up into 20 now. And as I get parallel with these signs now I'm in 14 foot right there, coming up to 13. So I would actually turn the boat and go back out and work back up even farther and come in. Because I don't want to come way up into shallow water. And what we're doing now, we're coming up on a hump, old river hump. There's 16, 15, leveling out at 15, almost trying to touch 14. That's probably about the top of it, right back there. A few fish on it, look at here. Pretty good little school right there. That looks pretty good. I'm gonna turn and head upstream. It's gonna start dropping back off. And what we've got here that makes this a pretty extra special hump, not only is it out in the middle and right on the edge of the river, it comes up to 14 foot, but it's got a creek channel that comes out in the back of this cove. Kind of a small like feeder creek that winds out and comes right across the end of it. You know, this is the second hump we've looked at on the video. The first hump had a couple signs up on it, and it was a shallow hump about 4 foot deep, and it was in a creek channel. This hump is out on the main river, and it's about 14 foot on top. So you got a lot of different in depth there. That shallow hump earlier in the year is going to be the best one to fish, and probably later on, once say about last of May, June, July, this would be a better hump to look for. You're going to have a lot of more current coming over top of this one, with the being right next to the river like that, and being in the main river, you might have a little cooler water. And it's a perfect place, again, for the fish to pull up on. And the way I like about this one, the way it sits kind of a little bit of an angle to the river, it offers the fish a couple places to get behind little indentures and stuff. You know, get out of the current, which could make it a pretty good place for them to hide. You know, when you're just riding down the lake or just looking at the lake, a lot of times you look around and you try and just pick out 2 or 3 key spots to fish real quick. And we're sitting here in the mouth of a creek, and we're coming out, and here's a hump right here that's marked by 2 signs. So I figured there's going to be some bass around that somewhere on that structure. I might have to, you know, spend a few minutes with a depth finder riding around there to find the key spots, but that could be one spot to fish. And I know right here we've got a main lake point coming out that splits the creek from the main river. That's another very key, obvious point, but a lot of people overlook that stuff because everybody thinks it's obvious and everybody thinks everybody else is fishing it. And but that would be, you know, 1, 2 key spots plus the ledge on the outside river. So that's 3 key spots you could check right here in probably 20, 30 minutes of fishing, and that are obvious that you could pick out. And then, like, if you're riding down the shoreline, you see one point sticking out farther or something, anything irregular, bluff bank, and it's got land going down in the water on both sides, you know, you might ride on out there and find you something underwater there. One other thing I'm gonna show you right over here that I really like to look for, that I noticed when I came in this creek earlier, is there's not many bushes in the water on this lake. But on this point up here, there's a bushes coming on out in the water. And so that tells me that point probably comes way out shallow. And that'd be a good spot to start early in the morning, top water, work on out with a Carolina rig or a lipless crankbait, maybe in a Carolina rig, and work right on that deeper as the day goes on. And that point might produce you fish all day long, and you fall off the riverside of it, you've probably got a good ledge right over there. So that's really a key point that you'd want to fish and everything. I'll run over real quick and show you what I'm talking about. Okay, I've got back over here. Now here's a point that runs way out in the water that's got a bunch of bushes on it. So and it's the only one in this area like that. So that tells me that that's probably a long, flat, shallow point, and it could be very good fishing, especially early in the morning, and to work right on at it with your a little bit deeper baits as the day got hotter and the sun got higher. You've got a ledge that falls off on the other side also. This is a stinger jig. It's 3/4 of an ounce. I've got me a Zoom pork on here, Zoom trailer. And this can be a great structure bait, and especially for big bass. There's two different ways that I like to fish it down there deep. I'll either throw it out and slow wind it, just letting it bump the bottom, keep it coming all the time, or I'll hop it. In the summertime, I'll do a lot more hopping when I think the fish are a little more aggressive and everything. Well, basically right now I think they're going to bite it more in a swimming mode. I'm just going to throw that big heavy jig up there. This is 3/4 ounce. Again, feel it down to the bottom. And there it is. Then I'm just basically, it's really nothing to this. Because what I'm doing, I'm just bringing it along at a slow pace. Every once in a while you can almost stop it and just let it, make sure it's making contact with the bottom. You might give it a little twitch once in a while just for a little extra added measure. But the whole process is basically just to keep it moving down there deep. And it's another presentation that they've never seen. You know, a lot of these fish had never seen out here in this deep structure, because most people are not going to throw the jig out there. But again, it produces tons of big fish, and it's a great way to fish. The other method is what we call hopping it. And what we'll do, we'll let the jig go all the way to the bottom. Again, just feel it down. And I use this more when I think the fish are a little more aggressive and you know, you're trying to get kind of a reaction strike. And basically what you'll do, you're kind of on a slack line, you'll just pop your rod like that, and that'll shoot that jig up off the bottom and then let it flutter back down. Just kind of pop it on a slack line and feel it back down until it hits the bottom. And if there's spotted bass in the area, they really love this. If you're on a lake that's got a lot of spots. I know Lake Lanier, Kentucky Lake, a lot of your Coosa Chain rivers and places like that. And actually, you know, I catch a lot of smallmouth doing this on structure too with a Zoom tube. That's another thing. You know, this is really a structure, and most people are looking at it for largemouth, but a lot of these tactics work for smallmouth real well. And that's one, I'll take that tube on like a 1/4 ounce head and throw it out there. And same thing, rip it off the bottom. Just rip it up and let it just free fall down. And those, like I say, the smallmouth and the spots really love that sometimes. In other words, if you're fishing it and just winding along slow, not getting bites, speed it up and try that a little bit. But give it something different. You know, again, don't just go out there all day and do the same old thing and put me and the fish to sleep. There you go. This is when I need a man with a net, which I don't have. He's a feisty little fish. Not a bad little bass there. Not a bad little bass. He's a little bigger than I thought he was. Hey, that's a nice tournament fish right there. Right here today. Whoa, here. You know, there's probably about 3 ways I'm gonna fish these sand points. And naturally, the number one way is gonna be with a Carolina rig because I can cover it kind of fast. Number 2, I might try the topwater bait because they're fairly shallow coming out before they drop off. Topwater bait could be a very good lure to try here. And then sometimes I'll have real good luck with a grub. And I hadn't got one rigged up now, but I'll just take a grub on a lead head and just throw it out and let it sink. And reel it back in, throw it out and let it sink. And a lot of times those bass will grab it before it ever hits the bottom. But that's about the 3 key lures that I'm gonna use on sand spots. But this is a real perfect place to catch a fish, and it'll probably be better just a little bit later on because we're getting into a main lake river channel type situation here that comes by and tips these points. And I'm sure some of the bass that spawn back in these little secondary coves have moved out on here, but in a little while when the fish come out of these creeks onto the main river, this will be one of the first stopping spots right up through here, and it'll be real, real good. You know, one thing about these sand points like this, there's like 6 of them right here in a row, and this is really a neat pattern to run. In other words, if you find fish on one of them, you can truck right on down and probably limit out in just a few minutes. Because the fish are going to usually, in a lake, when you find them on structure at a particular time or a particular day, they're going to hold on that level that they're on. In other words, if you're catching fish in 8 foot of water, probably anywhere around that area of the lake, they're going to be in 8 foot of water. If they're in 12 foot, they're probably going to be in 12 foot. It's like, you know, they just all seem to be tuned in to whatever depth that they happen to be on at that time. And they might stay there for a week or 2 sometimes, 3 weeks. Then they might move out deeper or move in shallower. But this is one, like say, you know the river channel cuts right in here. It goes right down by all these points and cuts back out. That makes a perfect place, you know, just like you're riding down the highway and there's a restaurant you want to eat at right there, and you pull in, get you something to eat, right back on the highway and you're gone. And that's what the bass has got here. You know, fishing the Carolina rig, there's several different ways to do it. You can drag it along, and you can hold your rod up high and kind of pump it. And I don't know which way is the best, how to tell you, but I like to pump it more sometimes, and then sometimes I like to drag. If I know what the structure is, I'll pump more. But if I'm looking for structure, I'll drag more so I've got better feel. But when you get a bite on a Carolina rig, I see so many people jerk too hard and too fast. You don't need to get in a hurry because that fish is sitting there holding that bait with just like a floating worm. There's no weight to it or anything. And he's going to hold it for a little while. Give him plenty of time. Make sure you got everything straight before you set the hook. That's all you got to do. Might have me a catfish, might have me a crappie, or might have me a bass. Come on, Big Daddy. I think he's going to try and, ooh, it's not a bad little fish. There he goes, hey. Hey. I like this. I believe that's a spotted bass. Come to daddy, come to daddy, come to daddy. Oh, come to daddy. That's why he was so mean. A little old spotted bass. You know, a real hot tactic on the tournament trail in the last year has been drop shotting. It's already produced 2 tournament wins and also a 2nd place at Texas. And actually at Texas this year, the guy was using light line and fishing a road bed in about 18 foot of water. And he had 2 20-pound bags of largemouth. I'll take a small Mustad #1 hook, and the way I rig this is with a Palomar knot. I come up the line about 30 inches, simple Palomar knot, always wet it, let it go down. Now the next trick is to take your tag end of the line, hold your hook up like this, and go right back through the hole 1 time from the top down. Pull it down, tight. What that does is, you notice, it makes your hook stand up on the line. See there, my hook stands up. Then I come down here about 20, 22 inches, and I take an an extreme drop shot weight. Half ounce is the one I like to use the best. And the thing about this is, the only place I know you can get these weights is at Bass Pro Shop. And this little weight has actually a little metal thing that comes out on the end, and it's on a swivel. It turns. And all you have to do is slide your line through the hole in the weight, pull it up in there, and there you go. She's locked in. You don't even have to tie it. So you've got about a 25, 24-inch leader here down. And then you're going to put a lure on here. And I've got 3 lures picked out here, but any plastic bait will work. It can be a 10-inch old monster worm, fluke, fish doctor, finesse worm, any of this stuff. And basically all I do, like I just take my little bait and just run the point of the hook right through it, just nose it. So that's your rig now. What happens, your weight hits the bottom, just let this fall and kind of jiggle, and it falls all around, ease it forward, just like working a Carolina rig kind of, stop it, let it flutter back down, twitch it, let it fall. And the nice thing about this, you can keep the bait right in front of the fish. You don't have to move the weight. When your line gets tight, just kill your rod and let it go back down. I like to fish this on a 6-foot medium action rod with about 8-pound strand line. The reason for this is I designed a rod especially for this. It's called the Woo Daves Finesse rod. And it's a medium action rod, but it's got a light tip to it, but plenty of backbone for the hook set. And you got a good feel with that tip, and you can feel that bait come up. When the line gets tight, just kill it and let it go back down. Key to fishing this drop shot rig is you want to act almost like you're hung up. In other words, you want this tied to the bottom, and you're just jigging this worm down till it hits bottom and jigging it back up. And when you feel the weight, stop. Don't pull the weight across the bottom. You're pulling it away from the fish. The object for this is cold front conditions, bluebird days, to keep the bait right in front of the bass and to aggravate them into hitting. And so that's the key. So once you feel it get tight, let it kill it, and just let it flutter down. And do that 2 or 3 times before you move the weight. You know, one neat thing about the drop shot rig is you've got an exposed hook. You've got a little hook out here, Mustad Ultra Point #1. It's needle sharp and exposed. And when the fish grabs it, 99% of the time, you're not going to know it, because he's going to hit it on the fall every time when it's falling. He's not going to hit it when you pull it up. So by the time you go to pull up, he's already got it. He's got it clamped in his mouth like that. The hook is down in there, and he's swimming off with it. So all you got to do is really reel real hard and just kind of sweep set into him, and you'll get him every time. Instead of jerking, and a lot of times when you jerk, you end up ripping it out. Almost let him catch himself, and you know, you won't have any problem. Plus, you're using light line, sometimes as low as 6-pound test, and you don't want to be jerking real hard. But that's a key, and I'll show you what I mean. If I'm working it along, in other words, I throw it out and I let it go to the bottom, and the way I'm going to work this thing, it's going to go to the bottom. I'm giving it worm time to get to the bottom, and I'm just going to twist my rod 2 or 3 times like that till I feel the weight, and then I'm just going to kill it again, not moving the weight, letting it fall down. And then I'm going to lift it up again like that. Well, by the time you go to lift off, usually he's on there, you're going to feel him swimming down and everything, and all you got to do is reel real fast like this, reel it real fast, and sweep back, just kind of sweep back. In other words, don't give a hard hook set like you have to on a Texas rig, but just kind of reel into him, and as you're reeling into him, you know, he's pulling down against that hook right there, it's biting in, and just sweep it a couple times, and that little light wire Mustad hook, you're going to get him every time. One reason I like the LCDs is because when I'm running down the lake and I've got to keep an eye on boats and stuff and make sure I'm not crashing into something, I can glance down there once in a while and it leaves me a picture of things that's going on in the back. Like here we are, we're coming up right here. Now we're way offshore, we've been in 25 foot, and look here, we're coming up 12, 11, 10. We're way offshore, and if you looked over there, you'd never realize that this point was way out here like this. But keep an eye on your depth finder every once in a while, and keep it on all the time, and learn just to glance at it now and then, and go back and check those spots. See, we fell back into 20 foot already. A lot of times, see, I'm sitting up in 6 foot of water now. I'm 100 yards offshore. I know it's about 10 foot deep where my buoy is, and it drops right off on the end. I know my point circles right around that way. The deepest side is actually on the inside of the creek. You've got your deepest side on that side, and you're kind of flowing side of the point going out this way. I'll get up here and just throw a Carolina rig, make just a fan cast all around, kind of working it along, dragging along to see if I can hit any stumps or rocks or any structure that might hold a fish. And I'm actually working from shallow to deep. You know, a lot of times that can be a trick for you, to set up on the shallow side of something and throw out into the deep side. And this could be a pretty good point, I think, because of the fact it probably doesn't get fished much. The only way you'd probably ever find it would be to see somebody fishing it. And then you probably wouldn't know how to fish it, and you wouldn't have the confidence in fishing it unless you'd spent a little bit of time around here checking things out. You know, one thing I like about that Lindy weight also when I'm Carolina rigging is when you ease your rod up or pull the bait, that weight actually stands up like that. And when it comes up 2 or 3 inches like that, what that does is lift your bait 2 or 3 inches off the bottom. If you're using a regular egg sinker or something like that, once your bait gets to the bottom the first time, it's more or less just dragging across through the mud the whole time. And with the Lindy weight standing up like that, it gives you, you know, you've got about a 3 to 4 inch little deal there, and when you pull it, it stands up on the bottom like that and lifts your bait up 2 or 3 inches off the bottom and allows it to settle back down every time. And you know, the bass is going to hit the plastic bait on the fall every time when it falls. And I think that gives you a lot more chances to get a bite by letting that bait, raising that bait and letting it fall, and raising it and letting it fall rather than just dragging it through the mud. And I know I've increased my catching not only because I'm never hung up anymore, but it seems like I just get more bites fishing with this weight. You know, we've gotten over here behind the actual point now, sitting between the bank and the point casting out, which is a good way to fish. And I put on an extreme lipless crankbait here. Another good bait's a rattle trap, a hot spot. Any of those lures will work real good out here when you're on these shallow end of these points and stuff. And it's a good bait to search for fish also. Sand humps, any place like that. Once I get out into my deeper structures, I know some frits, like some of the bigger other crankbait guys, like to fish those big lipless baits, but I'd rather go down to my ledge buster spinnerbait or my big zoom lizard when I'm out deeper. But up shallow, I like to take these lipless baits and run them right down the edge of these long shallow points and run out into the lake. Again, this was a little hidden spot. I hadn't got a bite here today. But if I was fishing this lake, I'd be right here the next time I came and check it again, because I can guarantee fish are going to be here one of these days. None of these spots are going to produce every day, because if they did, you'd win every tournament there was, and nobody ever heard of Woo Daves or Roland Martin, because you'd be the man. But you just got to keep coming back, hitting them and testing them, and there'll be fish there on them. You know, this is a good example of a creek point that you would want to look for if you were in a creek, because it shows you here perfect how to marker poles, and you won't have these marker poles on everywhere you go. So that's why I want to show you why the marker poles are here, how the creek channel goes right down beside this point. You can see that sharp point coming right there, and you know your creek channel runs right down beside it. You could pick this up off of your map, you know, if you're in a creek that doesn't have your marker poles. But this is a prime example, and I'll be real surprised if we didn't catch a fish off that point when we get down there. Just another illustration for you to see. When you look at your map, look for the point that's got the creek channel that runs right down the side of it. That's the way the fish pull up on the point, feed, then they drop right back in the channel. And that should be a key point in this creek. You know, here's what we're talking about. We've come up on this point. I'm sitting in 28 foot of water right here, and I can just make a little lob cast right over there and be in probably 3-4 foot. And that thing's gonna come right off that ledge. It'll be a great place for a crankbait, Carolina rig, spinnerbait. But it's also a great place for the fish to move up to feed and to duck right back into deep water. This is a spot I just feel like I'm gonna catch a fish, but might not work out. Can't catch them everywhere. But it is, and there'll be days, I guarantee you can sit right here and catch plenty of fish. Or times a day, probably when they're, see, this is another good deal. When they're pulling current, it's gonna come from way down that way, and it's got to come all the way down these banks and all the way around to here. And this is the first place that the current can actually wash across a point. You know, so if you were looking for a structure hole in a creek like that, that'd be something real, one of your first good key points to look at is, you know, what's the first point that the current's going to flow over good. And the bait fish have a chance to escape up on that point. You know, or the bass run them up on there, however you want to look at it. And this would probably be that point in this creek, because like I say, that channel comes way around here. It turns to go out that way, but the current will flow across here when they start pulling water to dam. And this would be a good place to be sitting, you know, when that happened. There he is. All right, fish, come on. Very nice. Not a bad fish at all. Goodbye. Here's a perfect example of a nice creek ledge. It comes out of the creek, bends around, and comes right in by this bank and runs down. We're up in the shallow side of it now. This is a prime place where you can throw the bait up in 4, 5, 6 foot of water. And if you watch right here in a second, it's going to drop right off. You see how quick it drops? You can just, bam, pull it right off into deep water. And somewhere along that ledge right there, I mean, in 2 boat lengths, it goes from 5 foot to 35. What I like to do, I get that crankbait down where it's digging kind of fast, and just slow it down and bring it right off the edge of that lip, and hopefully that fish is going to hit. Once I get on out and away from the lip 4 or 5 feet, I burn it on in usually and get it back over there, because I feel like the fish is right on that edge, on that structure. And if he doesn't bite it, in other words, I'll reel it down, slow it down, let it bump along there a little bit. But once I get it off there 5 or 6 foot and he didn't bite it, I'm usually going to kind of bring it in fast to get it back over what I consider the hot spot of the ledge. And this place right here is going to have a lot of fish on it at any minute. It might be tomorrow, this evening, or 2 days from now. But with all these fish coming out of this spawning areas back in here, they're going to load up along places like this for 2 or 3 weeks. And this is going to be a really, you know, key fishing spot to hit. And there's several more in here like this, but I like this one because it has a really good circle bend right here, comes right into the bank, runs straight for a little ways, and then has another little turn to it. What I've done here, I've laid out some crankbaits just to show you a little bit why they make so many different sizes and everything. As you'll notice here, this is a man 30 plus, this is a 20 plus, it's going to run about 20 foot, and this is a 15 plus. And that lure right there will run about 15 foot, and you can see the bigger the bill and the bigger bait is going to run deeper. Over here we've got a couple of lures like the Bass Pro XPS brand, and this is what I'm going to use right here because this ledge is about 6 foot on top and drops right off. Now if I was out a little bit later in the summer and I was fishing a ledge, say it was 10 foot deep, I might go to the man's 15 or the next size up XPS with a little bit bigger lip on it. But what you want to do, you know what, you don't want to go out and throw this big bait in 5 foot of water, and then again, you don't want to throw this little bait in if you're out in the 12 to 15 foot of water. You want to match the bait up to that'll get down to where the fish is what I'm trying to say. And crankbaits is probably the easiest way to catch fish, but it also can be the hardest way. People don't like to throw a crankbait a lot, especially the big deep dive ones if it works them to death. If it's stay down in the smaller range, they can hum them pretty good all day. But in the summer, again, these big ones, they're pretty tough to throw, so you usually want to make sure you're in an area where you feel like you're pretty sure you're going to catch a fish. It's not a good search bait. I always like to kind of give that bait a little twitch, speed it up a little bit, stop it sometimes, speed it up, stop it. Don't just get in the bind of whining along like this, throwing it out there and whining along. Gee golly whoppers there, I think I'm gonna catch me a fish, I'm gonna wind this thing along. That ain't gonna work very often. You gotta work that bait. I always tell people, if you're fishing a lure and you're not catching fish, guess what? The lure's fishing you. If you're catching fish, then you're fishing the lure. So think about that. If you're not getting a bite, make that lure do something different. Make it look alive, slow it down, speed it up, jerk it, twitch it. All kinds of things you can do to make it do something different. It might get you that strike. And here's a nice ledge right out on the main river and the mouth of the creek coming together. A lot of bait fish in this area. We got about 50 foot of water right here. As we just inch right along here, you're gonna see it's gonna come right up here pretty quick. 38, 36, 34, 32, right there. Look at the brush and stuff right out here on the end of this. A lot of bait fish. That's a perfect spot right there for a jigging spoon. All right, what we're fishing here is a point that comes out and meets the creek channel and the river channel kind of all coming together right here. And there's a lot of bait fish down here and a lot of all kinds of fish. I don't know what they are. They're just showing up as I came across the end of that. And basically what I'm doing, I'm just kind of lifting this spoon and letting it fall back on a slack line. I'm not jerking it up like this, because that's when you get in trouble, when you go to jerking spoons like that. You know, that's fine if you're rock fishing or striper fishing or something. But bass fishing, just ease it down. This technique is very good in the fall, cold weather months, and actually all through the summer. If you can find a school of bass on a hump, you can get your limit in just 5 seconds. Just five or six drops and you've got them. But I really like it in colder weather, cooler weather, and generally along the very mouth of the creek or out on the actual river channel where you've got a ledge or something that's going to work the best. But I have caught fish all through the summer doing it. There he is. Another thing, I don't mess time with him either. If I get him on there, that sucker's going on out that way. Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on, come on. Right, just like that. Do not mess with him at the side of the boat, because you're going to end up losing him every time. Not a huge bass, but a bass. We'll have to get some pliers on this bad boy. But, you know, that's what it's all about. It doesn't take long. But when you get him up here to the boat, just like that, when he's coming, if you got your partner with him, tell him, get the net, and have it ready. Because if you pull him up there and hold him, he's going to shake that head with that spoon and throw it 90% of the time. And he's going to try and jump at the boat every time. So what you want to do is, when you get him coming, is just bring him right on up over the side. And you'll land most of them like that. Here we are in 37, 38 foot of water. We're getting ready to come right up. This is a perfect example of a summertime fishing hole, a river ledge. You're going to have current hitting this every day when they generate water, and fish are going to pull up here because it kind of turns and makes a little hook in here. And the shad and stuff are going to pile up. See how I'm coming up on this point? All kinds of bait fish down there, big fish, everything. And as I swing around it, I'm just coming right around a horseshoe like this. I'm going to go right back out on the second little point. They're only like 20 yards apart. So that makes like a little net-like thing. When the water's coming down this way, all your bait fish and everything's going to stack up in there, and that's where the bass are going to stack up. It's just a buffet for the bass is all it is. There's probably some big hybrids in there, and no telling what all's down in there. Some big catfish, it could be anything. This ledge runs up right past that buoy, and it turns and makes a little hook right in there, as I explained. And that's just a catch-all, catch basin for all your shad, minnows, and everything that come down through there. If you see where my lure hits right there, I'm right on the other side of the point. I'm gonna come right across the point into the river. If there's any fish out here, they should definitely be stacked right on that little area right there. And again, they might not be generating today. It doesn't seem like any currents running through here. It might be a little early in the day. But I guarantee you when they move current here in about 2 or 3 weeks, you get on spots like this. That's what you want. Some kind of little indenture or point sticks out, some kind of sweet spot along that ledge that'll hold those bass. You know, these big spinner baits, I like to fish them on a long rod, and I developed a 7-foot rod in the Extreme Series, Woo Dave's model, 7-foot medium heavy rod. And what this rod does, it has a little bit of tip to it, as you can see, but it's got plenty of backbone to bow up, and you can throw these big spinner baits on it all day. Long rod, you know, you get a lot long distance cast. Once it gets out there, you just kind of feel it down till it gets almost, maybe hits the bottom even. It's about 18 foot deep right there. It just hit the bottom. I'm just gonna kind of pull it up, slow roll it along. And so I could bring this bait actually a lot faster than what we're, in other words, if I threw a 3/4 ounce spinnerbait out there, I'd be turning the handle like this to keep it down there. But with this one, I can reel along at a lot faster pace because of the weight of it. You got good feel with this bait. You can bring it along like a crankbait a lot faster, but if you notice, it doesn't work you to death. In other words, I'm not working myself to death fishing this lure. You know, in the last year, year and a half, the ledge buster spinnerbait craze has really hit the country, and people are catching fish on it all over. And I'm gonna try and explain exactly how the system works and what it means and why it was designed. Down on Lake Eufaula, Alabama, it was probably the #1 ledge fishing lake in the world, or crankbait fishing lake also, just miles and miles and miles of structure. And several years ago, some of the guys fishing down there, kind of like me, they're getting a little bit older, and they were trying to find a lure that they could fish down where the bass are that wouldn't work them to death. And you know, those big crankbaits, you throw them for 30 minutes for fish not biting, you got to put them down. Well, what they started doing was taking 3/4 ounce spinnerbait and putting an ounce, as much as an ounce of lead, an ounce and a quarter of lead on, you know, wiring it around the hook to get that big heavy spinnerbait, and they could get it down there and fish it like a crankbait. Well, Jack Tibbs from Strike Zone Lures came up with a Ledge Buster series of spinnerbaits, and what that is, it's a series that runs from 3/4 of an ounce up to an ounce. This is an 1.5 ounce model. You can see the head gets bigger. Here's a 2 ounce model, and they even go up to 2.5 ounces. And they all catch bass, and there's several reasons for this. Somebody said, why in the world would you need a 2 ounce bait or even? Well, in the past, we've always slow rolled spinnerbaits. You know, caught fish off of grass down in Texas and everything, but all we had was a 3/4 ounce spinnerbait, and you had to crawl it just along to catch fish. In the 2 weeks a year that they bit like that, that was fine. But after that, that technique was no good. Well, now what we found out, you can take that little heavier spinnerbait, put it down there and move it a little bit faster. Take a heavier one, even move it faster. And what that does, that creates reaction strikes from the fish. And that's why this spinnerbait craze has come on and become so popular all over the country. Let's say you're riding down the road in your car at 5 miles an hour. Here comes a guy at 10 miles an hour, passing you. Here comes another guy along at 15 miles an hour. Here comes another guy along at 20 miles an hour. Now what you're doing, you're putting 4 spinnerbaits in one strike zone, say 10 foot, 15 foot, but each lure you can move at a faster pace. In other words, my 2 ounce model, I can reel a whole lot faster than I can my ounce model. So that bass looks at, you know, after he comes off that 2-week biting period, and he said, well, that's the Woo Dave's Ledge Buster spinnerbait, and you can buy it at Bass Pro Shop. It's on aisle 6. I saw it the other day when I was in there. But what happens when this 2 ounce model comes by him 4 times as fast? He doesn't have time to see what kind it is. He's got to bite it or that bait is gone and he's going to nab it. And that's why this big spinnerbait's become so popular. That's a big one. That's a big fish. That is a big fish. That fish hit down in 20 foot of water. This is a good fish. Whew, look at the size of that fish. Don't get off, Big Daddy. Don't get off. Whew, this is a monster here. This is the best one we've had. Hey, Ledge Buster, man, what a fish, what a fish. Don't have a net. Man, that thing just ain't giving up. Hey. Look at here what Daddy got. Come on. That's the name of the game. Whew. That was worth the drive to Eufaula. That fish just come off the beds. But I can't believe he had that much power, or she did. That's a beautiful bass right there. Look at here. The Big Daddy Hog. Whew. That's a 2 ounce bait, and that's about a 5-pound fish. All right, Big Mama, get you a little bit of water. Come back to see me. You know, this has been a great week on Lake Eufaula. We've had beautiful weather and we've had excellent fishing. We've covered tried to cover every possible structure we can think of. I'm sure we missed one or two, but hopefully in this tape you have learned something about structure fishing from one way or the other. Like I say, we've covered everything from bridges to road beds to points, shallow, deep, creek points, ledges. I don't know just what all, and tried to show you some techniques that would work on all these places. And hopefully what I hope you've learned from this is, number one is, spend time on a structure. Don't just pull up there and make a few casts and leave. Use your depth finder, try and find your sweet spots, your key spots. Number two, keep a detailed map of where you're fishing, marks where you can find that place again when you find it. I hope you'll remember that when you go down the bank and find a place underwater, there's probably 2% of the people fishing it, versus when you fish a place that you can see, there's 100% fishing it. So you've got a lot more choice there to catch a fish. I also hope you've learned that you need to change lures a lot, and sizes of lures, just like talking with the ledge buster, going anywhere from 3/4 ounce all the way up to 2.5 ounces can change the speed of that bait going through the water to make it get you a reaction strike. Also, when you fish these places, try the drop shot rig, the Carolina rig, the spinner bait, top water, all different tactics on that spot. Try and make that fish bite it. I appreciate you buying the video. I hope you'll look back at Bass Pro at my other videos. If you haven't got those, give me a call, give Bass Pro a call, look us up on the website. We'll be glad to take good care of you. Again, if I run into you this year, come up, I want to shake your hand. Thank you.